worship with us here at the Vine. It's been sort of a weird weekend. Some sun, lots of rain, and then some more sun, a little cool morning. But we're glad that you're here to worship with us today. I had a friend growing up named Brian Hurt. Monica knows him, and he was pretty much my best friend growing up through high school. I spent a lot of weekends over at Brian's house. Brian had 5 brothers. He was the second oldest of 6 boys. And so I stayed over at his house a lot because, to be quite honest with you, it was a lot cooler to be at a house with 6 different guys hanging out than me and my imaginary friends as an only child when I was growing up. So I spent a lot of weekends at Brian's house and a lot of time talking with him and hanging out and was just really good friends all the way up probably to our mid-20s. But Brian's family had a pretty cool tradition, what I thought, looking from the outside in. Every Friday, now picture 6 boys, and his parents. Every Friday, his parents would go to the grocery store. And I don't know, maybe his dad got paid every Friday, and so that was the day to go grocery shopping. But they would go to the grocery store by themselves, which I think they probably went there and sat for a while before they ever started looking for groceries. Just peace and quiet, and they were by themselves. And so they would go to Kroger, and they'd be gone for a good extended period of time. And then on the way back home, they would stop at Burger King, and they would get 10 Whoppers and 10 fries. And that was like the treat for the family on Friday night was Mom and Dad were bringing home Burger King. And now it was no, have it your way. I mean, Burger King would do that, but Mom and Dad weren't. They were just getting 10 Whoppers, put everything on it, give me 10 fries, and they would take it home. And here was sort of the deal. You couldn't have your Burger King until the groceries got unloaded. Well, 6 boys, that wasn't too bad. That didn't take too long to do that. And so they would get it all in there, and then it would start. Now, maybe you haven't done the math yet. 10 Whoppers and 10 fries. Mom gets her Whopper and her fry. Dad gets his Whopper and his fry. And now there's 8 Whoppers and 8 French fries for 6 boys to fight over. I mean, this was the original octagon. This is where cage fighting began, in the living room of the Hurt house, because after Mom and Dad got their hamburgers, then it was like on. And they pretty much let them figure it out on them by themselves. And you know how it worked out. The 2 oldest boys got the 2 extra hamburgers and French fries until Michael, who was the 3rd, was big enough to fight for himself and get in there. And then lucky for him, Tommy Jr., who was the oldest, moved out. And then Jamie got one when Brian, my friend, moved out. And so as they graduated out, the boys got more Burger King hamburgers. But that was a pretty cool tradition. And at that house, you could say there was an abundance of male testosterone. I mean, there was fights, and here's what was so cool about his parents, about Brian's parents, Mr. and Miss Hurt. They used to act like nothing was going on. I mean, you'd hear screams from downstairs. You would hear blood-curdling screams. Mom, he's got my leg. They didn't even respond. They would always sit in the kitchen. I mean, I was amazed when I go over there. Him and Mr. and Miss Hurt would always be sitting at the kitchen table, drinking some coffee and just talking. And they never even until they heard the word blood. Now, if there was blood, they would at least say, go check on your brother. But for the most part, they let the brothers all figure it out and work it out. So there was a lot of male testosterone. There was a lot of fights in that house. I can remember being there. And again, when you're an only child and you have all these imaginary friends, you don't have a lot of fights. And so the first time there was a fight at the Hurt house, it sort of freaked me out. I'm like, I didn't know what to do. Do I hide? Do I run? Do I call somebody? Obviously, the parents aren't responding. And it turned out it wasn't all that bad. But you know one thing that they had in that house? An abundance of love. I mean, you would be hard to look at all the fights and all the whippings and timeouts and groundings and all that to see all of it. But that family has a lot of love. In fact, today they have not only 6 sons, now they have 6 daughter-in-laws, a ton of grandkids. And Mr. and Miss Hurt are still, he's retired now. She was always, she stayed at home. And so, they sort of have their lives now. And they sort of go around visiting all of the boys and the families and stuff. And so they love that. They had a ton of love in that house. And when you're in a home that you see a ton of love, when you see an abundance of love, you recognize it. It's noticeable to you. You can see something different. there, then you might not see somewhere else. I looked up the word abundant in Webster's, and it says an ample quantity. It's connected to maybe affluence or wealth. And then it had this definition: a relative degree of plentifulness. A relative degree of plentifulness. And I couldn't figure out how to put all that into a sentence, so I just said, here's my definition of abundance: over the top. Like, I need a car, but I don't need 10 cars. I need to eat, but I don't have to go to a buffet every night. I mean, there's things we can do that we have needs of, but a lot of times we take some of those things over the top. So my question for you today is, what would it look like to live in abundance? What would it look like to live in a state of ample quantity, a state of plentifulness? And I figured this out early this week, that when you look to see whether or not, let me just read it how I wrote it. It's not the amount of what you have that makes you have an abundance, but what you're measuring it against. It's not necessarily the amount of what you have that makes it abundant or not, but what is your measuring stick? What would it look like to live in abundance? Well, I would say to you, just look around. Just look out the window at the cars out there. Just look around at the clothes that you're wearing. Because I spent Monday night with the Family Promise Ministry and spent the night up there with 4 homeless families. And all of these homeless families were single moms with children. All of them had a job, because a lot of times we say, oh, well, they just need to get a job. They all had jobs. But, you know, they would look at your life and my life and say, man, you have an abundance. You just have it all, is what they would say. Imagine what it would be like to be a mom and have to drive around in 98 degrees without any air conditioning. I didn't say they wanted to. I mean, she has no option. Her air conditioning in her car doesn't work. She has to have that car to get back and forth to her job. And so when it's 98 degrees or it's 100 degrees, I mean, she just gets the 255 air conditioning going. She puts both windows down and goes 55 miles an hour. And so she would look at us pulling up in our cars with our air conditioning blowing. And in fact, sometimes we get in the car and go, oh, it's too cold. And she would look at us and say, man, you used to have an abundance. Imagine being an 8-month pregnant lady. Some of you ladies will appreciate this. 8 months pregnant. And this one particular lady is sleeping on a cot provided by Family Promise every day of the week. 8 months pregnant. Imagine being a grandmother who has custody of your 7-year-old granddaughter and your 2-year-old granddaughter. And you're a grandmother whose mother has cancer that could die any day. See, they would look at us. You may not look at your life and say, I have an abundance, but they would look at us and go, man, you guys just have it all. You see, it's not necessarily what you have. It's what are we measuring it against? And I spent that night and talked to the ladies and talked to their children. And Monica and the boys went out and hung out. And Mr. Kyle and Miss Pat came the next night and they spent the night. And you know, you and I would say, well, maybe we're middle class. We just have simple things. But they would look at our lives and say, man, you guys, you just have it all. You have a house. You have electricity. You have food. They have food, but it's provided by somebody else. They don't get to say, hey, tonight I want McDonald's. They live in the state of, tonight we get whatever such and such brings to us. And so most of us look at our lives and don't think we have an abundance of stuff. Most of us don't look at our lives. If I ask you that question, what does it look like to live in abundance? You wouldn't say, oh, me, it's my life. But if you look at who you're measuring it against, if you look at who's measuring us, you realize we eat 3 meals a day, but most of the world eats mostly one, maybe 2 meals a day. So just the fact that we would get up and have a choice of breakfast, lunch, and dinner is abundant in the eyes of the world. So what does it look like to live in abundance, to live over the top? And we're doing this God Is series. And so today what I want to talk about is the fact that God is abundant. God is over the top. God is abundant. And I'm just going to be up front with you. I'm going to try to prove that to you today. Because I believe if I can prove to you today that God is abundant, then when you come up against the walls and the stumbling blocks and the struggles of your life, hopefully you will remember that you have an abundant God to go to. Not just some little snaily God squirming along through life. That you have this abundant God. You have this over-the-top God that can help you with your life or whatever situation or whatever struggle or whatever problem you find yourself in. He's an abundant God. He's over the top and He can take you to places that you've never been. John chapter 1, verse 15, it says, John testified about Him when he shouted to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, 'Someone is coming after me who is far greater than I am. For He existed long before me.'" Verse 16 says, "From His abundance we have all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the unique one who is Himself God is near to the Father's heart, and He has revealed God to us." God is abundant, and out of His abundance we have received blessing after blessing after blessing after blessing. And you and I mostly struggle with, a lot of times, we don't see the blessing. Or we don't see the things that we have or possess or the blessings God has given to us. We don't even see those as blessings. Sometimes in our country, the Christians of America have this entitlement factor to them. Because I'm a Christian, God should give me all of this. Because I'm a Christian, I should never have to go through difficulty. Because I'm a Christian, none of this bad stuff should ever float my way. But from His abundance, He has given us blessing after blessing after blessing. So I want to prove to you today that God's abundant in three ways. First way is He is abundant in creation. He is abundant in creation. Genesis chapter 1, the story goes all the way back to the beginning. In fact, the Bible starts with "in the beginning." Genesis chapter 1. Let me just read the creation story to you. And see if you could just see the abundance that God has in creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light was good. Then He separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day and the darkness night. And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. Then God said, "Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that's what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens, and God called the space sky. And evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place so that dry ground could appear." And that's what happened. God called the dry ground land and the waters seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant, and trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came." And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind, and God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the third day. Then God said, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on earth. And that is what happened. God made two great lights, the larger one to govern the day and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the fourth day. Then God said, let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And then God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas and let the birds multiply on the earth. And evening passed and morning came, marking the fifth day. Then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And that's what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the seas and the birds of the sky and the livestock and all the wild animals on the earth and all the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and the animals that scurry along the ground. And then God said, look, I've given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And I've given you every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds of the sky and the small animals that scurry along the ground. Everything that has life. And that is what happened. Then God looked over all He had made, and He saw that it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. I don't know if you hear that, if you can grasp the fact that God is just over the top with His creation. I mean, He is just over the top. I mean, it isn't just a Play-Doh earth that we have. I did some research this week. Do you realize that through all the colors of the spectrums and every combination of colors that they can make, and every different shade that they can take with the colors, that they can make 10 million different colors? That's a lot more than Crayola has even tapped into. Even if you buy the big jumbo box of crayons, you can't get 10 million different colors. I guess that'll keep Crayola in business, because they always have a different color to come up with. Do you realize that there are 10,000 different species of birds? 10,000 different ones. There are 30,000 different species of fish. So He didn't just, when you read that story about, and He made the fish, He didn't just make one fish. He didn't just make two fish and say, all right, go be fruitful and multiply. He made a multitude. He went over the top with the fish. Now, maybe He knew we were going to like shrimp and lobster and some of those. And maybe He realized there were some fish that we weren't going to mess with. But He made all these different species of fish. By the time you add amphibians and mammals and reptiles, there are close to 60,000 different species just in the vertebrae section. There are almost 300,000 different kinds of plants. So He didn't just make grass. 300,000 different kinds of. I don't know about you. That seems a little over the top to me. Now, I don't have a horticulture degree. I'm not a big plant guy. But still, 300,000 seems like a lot. And then you get to our galaxy. You know, we live in the Milky Way, and you know, we think of Milky Way, we think of a candy bar, and then we think of our galaxy that we live in. But you know what we do? We think, man, our galaxy is just so enormous. Like we're just the big bosses of the universe. Like we just live in the place to be. I don't know if you realize this or not, but our galaxy is not all that there is to our universe. Our universe is 100,000 light years wide. But here's what, this was so cool. This is what I discovered this week from National Geographic. January 2013. This is a recent discovery. This is just hot off the presses. They have discovered And by discovered, I mean they have just found this new galaxy. Now, let me help you out here. I'm not a real science guy. I wish Hunt was here because he's a big science guy. He probably could get up here and actually explain all this. But let me just try to draw you some comparisons, okay? I'm just going to sort of read this article. It says, for comparison, our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is just 100,000 light years across from one side to the other, while the local supercluster of galaxies in which it's located, in other words, other galaxies sort of connected up, is only 100 million light years wide. Now still that's big. But guess what? They found something bigger. Astronomers have known for years that quasars can form immense clusters that stretch more than 700 million light years across, said Close. But the epic size of this group of 73, sitting about 9 billion light years away, has left them scratching their heads. Get this. That's because current astrophysical models appear to show that the upper size limit for a cosmic structure should be no more than 1.2 billion light years. This is what's all of the statement. So this represents a challenge to our current understanding and now creates a mystery rather than solves one, Close said. This titanic structure, known simply as the Large Quasar Group, the LQG, also appears to break the rules of a widely accepted cosmological principle which says the universe would pretty much look uniform when observed at the largest scales. If you zoomed all the way back out, it's all going to sort of look spaced just right. It could mean, get this, it could mean that our mathematical description of the universe has been oversimplified. And that would represent a serious difficulty and a serious increase in complexity, Close said. Over the top. How many thousands of years have we been studying the universe? How many times have scientists said, we've gotten to the end, we've gotten to, this is all the important stuff. And in 2013, they're still discovering galaxies and clusters of galaxies, larger than the Milky Way, bigger than the Milky Way, grander than the Milky Way, over the top. And then you and I. The Bible says God created us in His image. Do you realize what an incredible creation you are? With you, God went over the top. I look around here, and there's a few of you that may look alike, moms and dads and brothers and sisters and that kind of stuff. But do you realize how many unique characteristics just in this room are represented? I see light hair, and I see dark hair, and I see no hair, and I see gray hair, and I see some facial hair, and that's okay, ladies. Don't worry about it. I see skinny, I see tall, I see short, I see heavy. But in all of us, there's a nervous system. There is a skeletal system. There is a brain. There is a brain stem. There's functions that send impulses from your eyes into your brain, out through your nerves. That tells you take your hand off the hot stove. But even in those things that He made the same, He just went over the top. He said, I'm not going to make them all look alike. I'm not going to make them all. And you realize, and I know you've heard me preach about this before, and if you had, you're probably going, Rick, drop it, but I just can't get over it. You realize that your DNA is different than your DNA is different than your DNA is different than my DNA is different than your DNA. And so within us is this design factor by God. And He could have just said, well, just make them all look like me. But He said, nah, I'm over the top. I'm going to make it abundant to them. I'm going to show them my abundance and my creation of them by making them all so unique and so different by design that they will look and have to say, He is an incredible creator. So God has shown us His abundance in His creation. God has also shown us His abundance in our salvation. Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. It says, my old self has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not treat the grace of God as meaningless. For if keeping the law can make us right with God, then there would be no need for Christ to die. He says, I am crucified with Christ. The old me is dead. The Bible gives us a lot of clues into God's salvation plan. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He said, no one comes to the Father but by me. And today we live in a society where people want to find side roads to heaven and back doors to heaven. And they want to sneak under the gate. And folks, there's only one way you and I can get to heaven, and that is through Jesus Christ. But God said, I'm going to show him my abundance. And the Bible tells us that God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. John tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the cool part about that verse is at the end it says, and we beheld his glory. Man, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The people of that day got an eyewitness account to the glory of God. I'm talking a face-and-face encounter to the glory of God. Now, you and I live through the testimonies and the scriptures of the people who lived back in that day. But man, what an abundant God. Jesus Christ, while we were still sinners, Romans tells us, while we were still sinners, Christ died for our sins. While Christ hung up on the cross, he looked down at his mom and he said, woman, behold your son. The Bible tells us that he eventually released his Spirit. The people thought it was done, and people thought it was over, and the disciples were scattered. And a few days later, he came back, and when he came back, he says, I go to prepare a place for you. And then his final statement to the disciples, which is a statement that carries on today to you and to me, is to go and make disciples. Folks, we're not doing a real good job of making disciples. And yet his last command was to go and make disciples. God is abundant. He is over the top. Some people would say, well, why didn't God just snap his fingers and sin be done with? Because God wants to show us his abundance. And in the abundance of our sin, God showed us the abundance of his love. And in the abundance of forgiveness, God showed the abundance of punishment that Jesus Christ had to take. And in the abundance of the punishment that Jesus Christ took, it imparts to us the abundance of forgiveness that you and I need for our sins. God is abundant. And the last thing I want to say to you today is God is abundant in life. God is abundant in life. In everyday life, God is abundant. God is abundant in your life every day. His desire every day when you wake up is to be abundant in your life. He wants to be abundant in his presence in your life. He wants to be abundant in his communication with you throughout the day. He wants to be abundant. He wants to be over the top because he is over the top in love with you. He is over the top in care for you. And let's just be honest. I don't know you. I don't know what you do. I don't know what you're hiding. I don't know what you're sneaking on. But God does. And in spite of all of that, he has this abundant love for us. Listen to Psalm 139. It says, O Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me. I would just stop there and say, stop trying to hide from God. You can't. You can hide from yourself. You can hide from your family. You can hide from your friends. But you cannot hide from God. Verse 2 says, you know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. And you know what I'm going to say, even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful to me, too great for me to understand. I would just throw in there, Sue, over the top. Verse 7 says, I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride with the wings, if I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest ocean, even there your hand will guide me and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night, but even in darkness I cannot hide from you. To you the night shines as bright as the day. Darkness and light are the same to you. You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex, or I would say so over the top. Your workmanship is marvelous, how well I know it. You watched me as I was formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me. Oh God, if only you would destroy the wicked. Get out of my life, you murderers. They blaspheme you. Your enemies misuse your name, O Lord. Shouldn't I hate those who hate you? Shouldn't I despise those who oppose you? Yes, I hate them with total hatred, for your enemies are my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out to me anything that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. I don't know what you're going through today. I don't know what your struggle is. I don't know what your joy is. I know this week I visited some people in a hospital, spent the night with some homeless families, have had to work my way through the week at the Harris House, have had to do my job, have had to encounter ups and downs along the week. But I'm here to tell you this morning that God is over the top for you. I got a text message right before church. One of our families saying, please put us on your prayer list. Special prayer needed. Folks, God is abundant. I think one of the reasons He was abundant in His creation so that tomorrow when you're riding down the road and the stresses or the pressures or whatever is hitting you is starting to hit you early Monday morning, that you can look out and you'll see along the side of the road a plant growing up. Tomorrow you'll be doing your thing and you'll come out at lunchtime to go get lunch or something, and the sun's just going to be so bright and the heat's just going to be so real just to click you in. Hey, I made that. Tonight you'll go to bed and you'll lay down and you may look out and see the big old moon, just to remind you how abundant God is, how over the top God is. I have down here, this sort of goes back to my original statement. When your God is abundant, you're not afraid to pray for anything. But when your God's just this little willy-nilly God, and you don't realize the abundance of who He is, the power that He has, the love that He has for you, there's a lot of times something will happen in your life and your last thought will be to pray about it. Why? Because, well, He couldn't do anything about it. But when you realize that your God is abundant and the trouble comes and the stresses come and the phone call comes and the knock on the door happens and the boss walks into your office, if your God's abundant and those pressures and those stresses and all that hit you, you will pray for anything. My challenge to you today is to realize how abundant our God is, how over the top He is, and how over the top in love with you He is. You are His creation of His highest order. Just think about this. Everything that He made, all of those species of birds, all of those species of fish, all the vertebrates and the invertebrates, all of the galaxies and superclusters, and all of that He has created, none of that compares to the love He has for the creation called you. God is abundant today. Let's pray.